Hi folks, you're with us today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about going a little bit off political topic, I guess, but I'd like to talk about fame and how it can destroy the unprepared or the unready. And I'll use an example. I was doing some doodling on the interfact, looking for some music that I remembered from years ago and from childhood, and the name came up that of a guy that I knew. I was buddies with a guy in first year high school. He had an older brother, I think in third year or fourth year high school, I think at the time. But the older brother had an incredible singing voice. You know, he's almost pitch perfect. And I remember one of the hits of the the big songs on the radio really at the time. I think it was a Billy Joel number from memory, but among others, this guy could burst into song and sing the song perfectly, perfect pitch, perfect timing. He could perfectly recreate it, and if you closed your eyes, he could have been Billy Joel. So he just had this great singing voice. He had the real ear for music too. He could just listen to a song and just he could sort of remember it and sing it and get all the timing right and all that sort of thing. So I didn't know. I was buddies with his younger brother, but I'd sort of come across him. But he ended up going into a band fairly young. I think he left school even before he was 15, which was the right thing for someone like him to do. He was he was not a bright kid, but he had this talent. So he went into a band, and then they got a lot of things sort of got together. That somehow some musical producer or a guy who owned a record label or something like that discovered them, maybe saw them playing in some sort of a venue and thought these guys could go places and gave them a recording deal. And they had he teamed them up with a songwriter who was on the way up, and they ended up doing very well and touring the world and doing some having some good hits, and some of the big names in the rock industry were talking about them, saying, these guys are going to go places and that sort of thing. So by the time this guy was like 21, 22, he had he had millions. He had this really fancy apartment overlooking the ocean and just near the beach, and the fancy car. He was notorious for wild parties where there was so much to smoke and snort that everyone who went there would be guaranteed to be out of their tree, and the whole thing, the fast-paced life, the hot babes and the parties and everything like that. So now, I saw him probably. I lost touch with the other brother left school, like my buddy left school as well, and I stayed on, and so we went in different directions. But every now and again I'd bump into him, and I went over to see one day. He said, "Come over and see there's a party going on," or I don't even think it was a party. I think it was like a lunch. I remember it was a hot summer's day, and went over there, and I couldn't believe the brother. He was this hollow-eyed, junkie, drug addict guy. He was really fucked up, and later on, I sort of read about how because he had such a great voice, he could have got a lot of work, and there were a lot of bands that wanted him, and these sort of things, and a lot of even basic stuff like singing background harmonies and vocals for like studio productions for other musicians. That paid quite well. He could have done quite, but he snorted and partied and pissed all the money away. So that rich though he had been, it was all gone. And so By the time he was in his not even late 20s, probably 26, 27, something like that, he was on the bones of his ass, needlessly so. And recording sessions would be arranged, which I found out later, not at the time. Recording sessions would be organised for him, and songwriters would be organised to write songs for him, especially for him. And he got himself together a couple of times, and then again, as soon as the money started pouring in, he went, and the fame arrived, and he was doing all the interviews and all this sort of thing. And it's a bit of a grind when you're a rock star, because all the the radio interviews, TV back in the day, radio interviews, TV interviews, and all sorts of things. People want a piece of you, want to talk to you. You're a big star, and you can't go out of your front door, you can't leave your hotel room or anything like that without mobs, mobbing you. And this guy, maybe he never had the proper support or the people around him to give him the advice. Maybe he did, and he ignored them. He had even that I identified as a kid in first year. He had a bit of a devil may care attitude about things, which implied or suggested, as I got older, I realised implied sort of a self-destructive thing. Live for the moment, live for today, fuck tomorrow, and everything like that. So you could sort of really see that in him anyway. But these recording sessions would be lined up for him, and he just wouldn't turn up. No one could find him. Now, when you book a studio with all the musicians and all the the sound engineers and all that sort of thing, it's an expensive business. So if your star doesn't turn up, you've burned some serious money. Studio executives are asking questions, and give this guy one more chance, and after that it's over, and that sort of thing. So he didn't do himself any favors, or he would turn up, and as soon as he'd turn up, he'd go into the toilet, snort some lines, and he'd come in and he'd make an absolute mess of the recording, and so they had to sort of wait till they had to sort of put him, tie him up and put him in the corner, wait till the effect of the drugs had passed, and then try again. All this sort of stuff. And in the end, the people that were really around him to try and say, here's another song, or you can relaunch your career, and all that sort of stuff. And the guy could have done very well. Again, great voice, and a lot of people believed in him, really thought that his voice was commercially viable. But he managed to alienate every single one of them, and so they all abandoned him as being a dead loss, because he was too hooked on drugs and parties and just acting irresponsibly. So by the time he was like 30, he was completely fucked. And he still got some gigs, some minor gigs, singing his older hits, but again was unreliable, and even that was sort of minimal. So you've got a guy, by the time he's in his early 30s, really, he's surviving on government unemployment handouts, and living sort of living out of lounge rooms, couches in people's lounge rooms, and all that sort of stuff. I mean, it's very sad to see that somebody, but the thing is, he couldn't seem to handle the fame, and certainly didn't know what to do with the money. Now, again, I'm not sure whether he just didn't have the advice or the management, or he ignored what advice he had. But if I saw somebody, and just me, if I saw someone going downhill like that, I'd take, I'd move in and say, hey, we're gonna put some money aside for you, and do what you can to look after the guy. I mean, the guy's 21; he can make his own decisions in theory, but to at least stop his self-destruction, if indeed that's possible, or even legal in this day and age, for that matter. But I noticed that now, looking outside of that at other people, not in rock music necessarily, but in business, looking at, say, someone that became a very successful stockbroker at a young age, and whether they were fronting for people that were committing crimes or not, but nonetheless, they made an absolute ton of money a young age, and then they went, the drugs, the parties, the prostitutes, and so on, and they tore themselves to pieces, and they were burnt out shells by the time they're in their mid-20s. And I came across people like that, or even even in business, as I was in. I remember a guy who owned a very successful IT firm, and he was renowned in Sydney for having some of the raunchiest, best parties in the city. And I knew him quite well, or well enough, and he used to invite me to these parties, and I didn't go. And if sort of finally, he said, look, you never turn up to my parties, why not? And so I felt sort of obligated to go, just as if you like, a public relations exercise. And holy shit, those parties were every bit as happening as was alleged. There was no. There was definitely no overstatement on here, and I couldn't believe it that you go into and everybody there has got money, and this guy had a lot of money. He kind of had the drugs and the dope just everywhere, and everyone was just losing their minds, and it was an interesting thing to behold. And again, when people are that rich, they can just call up the local brothel and say, look, send me top, your top 10 best hookers, and how much will that be? $gazillion, fine, done, put it on the credit card. And no, they can do those sorts of things where the average person, of course, can't do that. But that guy who was so rich and had this following of people who were groveling at his feet, just happy to accept his handouts and cast-offs and the crumbs from his table, because even the crumbs were sort of covered in gold. He lost the plot again, the fame and the money and all this sort of thing, and it all fell to pieces for him. And one day I was walking through a shopping centre, and I go, hey, and it was I didn't recognise him at first. He always wore the sharpest suits, was immaculately groomed, and was there's a guy looking quite dishevelled in clothes that he looked like he got out of the opportunity store or something, and he's got these shoes that are falling to pieces, and I didn't. Oh, hi, hey. And I was so stunned at the sight of him and shocked at the condition he was in that I was almost speechless. He was again, this rich guy, and so he and he had this. Oh, have you got any dope? Have you got any dope? Do you have some? Oh, could you lend me $20? Yeah, and it was maybe sort of the same shock that people had once they bumped into Oscar Wilde when he was in Paris in the early 1900s or something like that. But the once famous Oscar Wilde. So here was a guy who'd fallen to pieces, and once the descent began, it's like every act that he took seemed to add to the speed and the severity of the descent. And so just going in another direction, a guy again, hugely successful, multi-gazillionaire, but it all fell to pieces. There's a few court cases, there's a couple of divorces, and a couple of risky investments that go wrong. And the guy, his wife, or I think his ex-wife, that was sort of looking after his affairs, he died under murky circumstances. I suspect at his own hand, but his ex-wife was looking after his affairs, and I got a call from her, and she said, "Look, Billy Bob, your name's in his diary, and I'm going through the diary. Wait for this, trying to find people to come to his funeral." Now, again, this was a guy who could have filled an auditorium at one point. And now his ex-wife's desperately calling around trying to find anyone who's prepared to go to his funeral. It's a bit like the F. Scott Fitzgerald sort of scene in The Great Gatsby. All these people turn up for his parties, but no one will come to his funeral. So So she's asked me would I come to his funeral. No, I didn't really know him that well. I'd met him a few times. Didn't actually think that much of him, but we'd met a few times, and he at one stage he'd actually offered me a job, which I turned down. But he again, a multi-gazillionaire, flying high, riding high, and high and mighty, and now it's been reduced to this. So I just intrigued. I sort of asked some questions. I remember that, he could have, and I even said words to the effect of, look, last time I sort of saw him, he could have filled an auditorium with just a wave of his hand almost. And she explained, well, it's not that way now. And she sent out invitations to people to come to the funeral, and she either got no responses or got rebuttals. And so she's reduced to going through his old diaries and digging up names and numbers of people that he'd mentioned, and she said, look, he seemed to have a high opinion of you. He's got in his diary an entry here that some positive utterance or statement there. So given that he thought well of you, would you be kind enough to come along to his funeral? And she was reduced to doing that, calling people to the diary. I mean, just out of a sense of that she called and asked so nicely, I sort of went along. But this idea of does fame kill and fortune, or does it not so much kill but destroy, and does it bring people undone? But just as importantly, all these people that come queuing up for your favors and your handouts, do they secretly despise you and hate you for being successful? And do they in fact relish the day when you fall on your face, or come undone or come unstuck? And how much of this adulation is sincere or real, and how much of it is just people parasiting off that success? In the case of the singer, I think he was surrounded by people, particularly in the recording side of things, self-interest included. He had a great voice; they could make money out of him. That did do, up to a point at least, did do what they could to give him the opportunities, and he squandered them. So there's that. But the success that he had at a young age, the millions that actually brought him undone, that gave him this sense of unreality. And you see this sense of unreality in a lot of people that are given success. You could see it, for example, in the affirmative action process, where kids that would flunk the simplest exam in junior high school are given passes, then they're passed through senior high school, then they're given a degree, then they're given a PhD, all of it through affirmative action. None of it's real, and it gives them a sense of reality that's so perverse and so unreal that in itself is enough to bring them undone when even the slightest hint of reality strikes. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.